Now you've had a look at the structure of the heart, we're going to have a look at the rest of the circulatory system, and that is looking at the blood vessels and at blood. So there are three types of blood vessels found in your body, and people always get mixed up about what blood vessels are doing what. So usually how I remember it is arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. So you're talking about AA here, arteries carrying blood away. So an example of that is your pulmonary artery, it's carrying blood away from the heart, or your aorta, it's carrying blood away from the heart. Now, if blood is being carried into the heart, it is carried in veins. And I remember that by veins are spelled V-E-I-N for in, veins. And they carry blood towards the heart. An example of that would be your vena cava. It's the major vein carrying blood towards or into the heart. And also you've got your pulmonary vein that carries blood into the left atrium. And then the blood vessels are the smaller blood vessels, because what happens is the arteries start to branch into smaller and smaller blood vessels. They branch into arterioles, and then they branch into capillaries. And then these capillaries, or this capillary network, then starts to form into venules, and they form into veins, and that carries the blood back towards the heart. So the thing that connects the arteries and the veins are called the capillaries. Now, the main arteries and the veins that are connected to the heart, we've already mentioned. That's the aorta, the vena cava, the pulmonary arteries and veins, and also as well to remember the coronary arteries. And the coronary arteries, if you remember, they carry blood away from the heart, but by away from the heart, what we mean is out from the chambers in the heart, and they carry the blood just to the heart muscle itself in order to give the heart muscle blood, oxygen and glucose. So looking at these vessels in a bit more detail. Now, arteries are have got very thick muscular walls, and if you remember, that is because the blood, in the case of the aorta, for example, the blood is travelling out there under high pressure. What's happening is that left ventricle is pushing the blood out of the aorta, and it's under high pressure because it's got to pump its way all around the body. So the artery's got to have a thick muscular wall to cope with that blood that is travelling through it. Arteries also have a pulse in them, and that pulse is the movement of the blood being pushed out of the heart along the artery. So when you feel your pulse, what you're feeling is your actual heart rate. Every time that your heart beats and pushes blood out into the aorta, that is your pulse that is being felt. And the next vessels are the veins. And veins, they're under a lower pressure, so they have a thinner muscular wall. Now, veins also have valves in them. And I always remember that by V for veins, valves, V for valves, V for veins. And these valves that are there, they prevent blood flowing backwards. So for example, you know I'm not very good at art, but we'll say here is a wee leg. And you've got your vein, and blood is being pumped up the way towards your heart. Then the problem is that gravity is going to work against that, and some of the blood could start to fall back and pool in areas. So what happens is along your veins you've got these valves that prevent that blood flowing backwards. So for example, the blood will flow along here, it will go through these valves, and the valves then, like this, will close and it'll prevent the blood flowing back the way. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at capillaries. Now, capillaries, in this diagram here, it looks like they're enormous, but they're tiny, tiny blood vessels. So, for example, when you cut your finger, you cut through the capillaries that are there. Capillaries are a network that are formed throughout the whole of your body, and they allow exchange of materials between the blood and the cells of the body. So for example, if we have a look here and we imagine this is our capillary here, and I've got here that they're very, very thin. They're only 1 cell thick in some cases. And what can happen is, if you imagine that there are cells that are round about here, and the blood is inside here, we'll make it red for blood. So we've got our red blood cells. Then the oxygen can diffuse through the walls of the capillary into the blood cells, because there's going to be a lot of oxygen in oxygenated blood there. It's going to be low in oxygen in the cells here, so the oxygen will diffuse down that concentration gradient into the cell, and there the oxygen will be used up in respiration. And the same goes for glucose. When we're looking at carbon dioxide, well, carbon dioxide starts to build up inside the cell in the process of respiration. And so the carbon dioxide diffuses out of the cell into the capillaries, and it can be carried away from there up to the lungs, and there the carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the lungs into the air. And we'll have a look at that when we look at our respiratory system. So the fact that these capillaries are just 1 cell thick, that allows faster diffusion of materials. And the capillaries as well, because they're a vast network, they provide a large surface area for exchange of materials like oxygen and carbon dioxide. So moving on to have a look at blood. Now, blood, when you see it, when you cut yourself, it's just this red liquid that comes out, but that blood is actually composed of 3 main parts. You've got a watery liquid called plasma, and if we leave blood to settle down, what happens is it separates into the cells drop to the bottom, and the plasma is a liquid part of the blood. It carries substances like sugars, salts, amino acids, water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, oxygen's carried in the red blood cells, and something here called urea, which is a waste substance. Now the red blood cells have dropped down here to the bottom, and here we've got white blood cells, because your blood is composed of white blood cells as well. White blood cells are involved in fighting infection. Red blood cells are involved in carrying oxygen about the body, and I've got something here called platelets. Platelets are involved in clotting when you cut yourself and your blood clots. So looking a wee bit more in more detail at the transport of oxygen. Now, I said oxygen is carried by the red blood cells, and it's carried in a molecule called hemoglobin. And what happens is when oxygen links to that hemoglobin, it becomes oxyhemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin is a protein. It's got a non-protein part to it as well. It's got what is known as a heme group. So we've got this polypeptide, which makes up the protein part, and we've got attached to that our heme group. And if you remember your proteins, you'll know that it's a conjugated protein, because we've got another group added onto it. Now that hemoglobin group has got iron within the heme group. So you remember how we kind of talk about it's good for you to be eating iron in your diet, and that's because it's involved in making this heme group in red blood cells, and the heme group is involved in carrying oxygen. So if you're low in iron, then you'll be low in oxygen being carried about your body, and you're termed as being anemic, and you've maybe heard that term. So that's the structure of our hemoglobin. What happens here is that the oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin groups. So we've had a look at the structure of hemoglobin. Let's have a look briefly at the structure of a red blood cell. Well, the structure of the red blood cell helps it to carry oxygen, and it helps it because it's got this biconcave shape. It's got this shape here, in this part here, where it's dented, and it's the same on the other side of it, and that increases the surface area, and that enables it to carry more oxygen. It also has no nucleus, and that means that it's able to contain more hemoglobin, and therefore it's able to contain more oxygen. Now what I'll do is I'll post various videos on the circulatory system on your iTunes U. I'll also put on your iTunes U a pig heart dissection. For those of you who are of a squeamish disposition, you don't have to watch that.